Hello, Quillers, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger, except that today's episode is not quite so exciting. It's actually a somber episode. We're here today on this episode of Don't Quill the Messenger to pay tribute to our departed friend and fellow Oxfordian, immediate past president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, Tom Regnier. Tom was one of the great leaders of the Oxfordian movement, and as I mentioned, the immediate past president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. He served an unprecedented 4 years as president of the organization and led us to a place where we are now, bringing about many of the wonderful advancements that the organization has been able to accomplish over the last 5 or 6 years total. And we have with us in the studio today one of our favorite guests, Dr. Earl Showerman, who knew Tom very well and worked with Tom as a fellow Oxfordian for many, many years, as well as my wife, Annie, who credits Tom with her final conversion to Oxfordianism, and I'll let her explain a little bit about that as well. We're glad that you could join us for today's episode because it is fitting to pay tribute to Tom, who was a champion of the Oxfordian movement and a great leader to many of us. Earl, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here, but also a pain to be sharing memories of such a great friend and a prodigious leader as Tom Regnier. He clearly changed the face of our organization over his engagement over the past decade or more, and was unquestionably the face of Oxfordianism in North America. He was our communication chairman for the last 5 years. He created the social media outlets that we have evolved. The current website of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship owes everything to his leadership and his collaboration with Jennifer Newton. I could list many, many qualities that Tom possessed personally that would be so admirable, but I think as our conversation goes on, some of this will be revealed.
And Annie, welcome.
Hello, so happy to be here. I never knew Tom myself, but I do credit, as Stephen says, my final conversion over to being an Oxfordian to a YouTube video that I watched of Tom at the wee hours of the morning that kept me quite engrossed the entire time that I was watching it and led me to explore this Oxfordian movement and the whole Shakespeare authorship question a lot further than I ever had before. So though I never knew Tom, I have this image of him giving this YouTube video in my mind whenever I think of him. And, you know, I would say thank you to Tom for helping shape what my perception of the Oxfordian movement is.
You know, I don't know this for a fact, whether or not it is the most viewed of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship videos, but my guess is it's at least up in the top 5 of the videos that are available. And if you haven't visited our YouTube channel and found some of the videos of other presenters and presentations from conferences past, there are multiple presentations from Tom, some of them on some great content and topics, not only his Gable Stage presentation, which is a wonderful way to introduce people to the Shakespeare authorship question and Oxfordianism, but also some of his others, including he does a great one on the legal mind of Hamlet. Many of them obviously circle around the law and Shakespeare's knowledge of the law, as Tom was a very successful attorney throughout his life. And then there's also one of my favorites is a really wonderful one he did about the history of our organization, the history of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. And prior to his death, he and I were working on some documents to include in some of our press materials and marketing materials regarding the history of the organization. And I was pleased to be able to have that exchange with him over the past few months prior to his passing. Earl, I know you've known Tom for a very long time. Can you tell us a little bit about when you first met Tom?
Well, I met Tom in church, of all places.
I don't believe that to be true.
This is, in fact, the case. In 2004, the Shakespeare Fellowship had a conference in Baltimore on the campus of Johns Hopkins University. And part of that conference was a debate between Roger Strittmatter and Hank Whittemore versus Alan Nelson and Terry Ross. and it was conducted in a church on the university campus, walking distance from the hotel. And I was sitting in the lobby of the church quietly, just waiting for the thing to begin. And this young man sitting across from me, I say young because he always looked so young and vital, even though he was 69 when he was struck down. So he did have a very full life, actually. And he introduced himself to me and handed me a copy of his article on Shakespeare and the Law of Inheritance, which he had been published just very recently in the Miami Law Review. Tom was to give the keynote address at that conference in 2004. So right away, we had so much in common because I was just about to publish a paper on Hamlet and the Oresteia. And of course, the third part of the Oresteia is the Eumenides, which is basically the trial of Orestes at the Areopagus. So immediately we hit it off. And following that, over the years, we collaborated frequently, mostly around creating conferences, in my experience. Tom virtually spoke at every one of our conferences over the next 15 years. And it was in the 2004 Baltimore conference of the fellowship that Chaz Sherwood and Lynn Kozycki decided that it would be best if both the Shakespeare Oxford Society and the Shakespeare Fellowship had joint educational conferences every year. And Ashland in 2005 was the first occasion. So Tom was there from the very beginning of the movement that would bring our two organizations together. And it was in 2012 when Tom became president of the Shakespeare Fellowship. And I think my lucky star that he was on our board, because I was termed out as the president at that time, and the board universally approved that Tom should take over as president. And at first he was a bit reluctant. He didn't believe that he had perhaps the personal energy to carry on. Well, once he took up the baton, there was no stopping him, and he was a force to be reckoned with. So much of what good came forward after that is based on Tom's great goodwill and determination, intelligence, wit, and ability to exhibit diplomacy when the rest of us were pulling our hair out. I'll give you one example. In 2011, the film Anonymous was produced and in wide distribution, and the De Vere Society was a bit concerned about the political nature of the royal bastardy themes that are in that film, that fictional film by Roland Emmerich. And they created a statement that they published in their newsletter. And it was my intention as president of the Shakespeare Fellowship that we should follow suit, that we should also develop our own response to the film in order to identify the fact that we much approved of the idea of a great film, a wonderful film, really, about the Earl of Oxford as Shakespeare, but that the political interpretation that Emmerich chose to pursue was not necessarily a agreed upon solution to the question of authorship that Oxfordians all embraced. Well, the board was split over whether we should go ahead with any kind of a statement or not, and I could not force the issue. And then Tom came up with a statement that helped mollify both camps, those who opposed the idea of a Prince Tutor and those who supported it. And I'm just going to read you a couple of paragraphs in the statement that Tom did. That he said, the Shakespeare Fellowship resoundingly supports the proposition that Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, was the true genius behind the works of William Shakespeare, and congratulates Roland Emmerich on his movie Anonymous, the first major feature film to deal with this fascinating subject. We hope the film will encourage people to explore the authorship question and decide for themselves whether William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon was the true author of the great plays and poems traditionally attributed to him. The Shakespeare Fellowship notes that Mr. Emmerich characterizes his film as a work of fiction. He makes no claim that all the events depicted in the film are true. He is fully aware that elements of his story, that Oxford may have been the son of Queen Elizabeth, or that Oxford and Elizabeth had a child who was raised as the third Earl of Southampton, are not endorsed by many of those who hold the Earl of Oxford was Shakespeare. Most Oxfordians do not believe that these hypotheses are necessary to the proposition that Oxford wrote Shakespeare's works, or to gain an understanding of the author's need for anonymity. Such succession narratives have existed for decades, and scholarly inquiry is still proceeding. With this in mind, we do not prematurely endorse or condemn conclusions merely because of their potentially controversial nature. Rather, We trust in the spirit of open inquiry and rigorous scholarship to eventually shed greater light.
Can you read that last sentence again? Because I think that last sentence really is Tom's voice. That really sums up Tom.
Yes. With this in mind, we do not prematurely endorse or condemn conclusions merely because of their potentially controversial nature. Rather, we trust in the spirit of open inquiry and rigorous scholarship to eventually shed greater light. So he was the consummate diplomat, and
he was, and that the spirit of rigorous research and open inquiry, and I think that really does sum up a lot of what our whole organization is, what the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship is really about, what this program, this very series of podcasts is about. We always end each program with the same statement that we tell our listeners: keep asking questions. And Tom was definitely one of those who encouraged that we continue to ask questions about this topic in order to try to get to the truth. And I think, Annie, that might be one of the things that engaged you so much with the Gable Stage video. And I know you told the story in a previous episode of the program, but I think it's fitting that you tell that story again today for today's program.
Absolutely. So I remember my dear husband, Stephen, who's sitting to the left of me right now, did his first presentation for a conference with the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, which was 2 years ago when the conference was in Ashland, correct?
it was 5 years ago.
No, that would have been
2015.
That would have been 5 years ago that we were in Ashland, but it was 2 years ago that we were in Oakland when I gave my first presentation.
That's right. So sorry. Oakland was the first presentation. So then you, Stephen, had done the presentation for me as a rehearsal, I know. But then once the YouTube video of your presentation at the actual conference became available for us to watch, I, of course, wanted to see it again and to see, you dynamically speak about the Oxfordian question. And as a full caveat, prior to viewing Tom's YouTube video, which I'll get to in a moment, I think Stephen was probably the only person that I ever really listened to talk about the Oxfordian question and the whole Shakespeare authorship question in general. And a lot of it was me playing the part of a supportive wife. And yes, I was genuinely interested because I have a history of Shakespeare performance, and I've been an actress for most of my life, which was why Stephen and I met and connected to begin with. So when Stephen said that his presentation was available for viewing, I said, of course, we need to watch it. So we sat down one night in front of we got YouTube pulled up on our nice big screen TV, and we sat down and we watched it. And so I was doing my wifely duty and enjoying my husband's fabulous presentation, which really was fabulous. Of course, I'm biased. And then after that, I knew it was very late. So Stephen went to bed and I started just rabbit holing. I totally went down the rabbit hole and I was like, oh, what's this next YouTube video? Oh my goodness, it's midnight. I should probably go to bed. But then, as YouTube is wont to do, it'll just start playing. And before I knew it, I was watching, and it was Tom Regnier's presentation at the Gable Stage. And I just remember thinking in my mind, wow, I can't stop watching this because this is extremely interesting. And this isn't, this is the first person that I've ever really listened to or watched do a presentation of this vein beyond my husband. And so no longer am I just doing a wifely supportive duty and, cheering my husband on with true interest, but now I'm also interested just for the pure sake of being interested in the subject. I didn't know Tom. I didn't know anything about Tom. I'd heard Stephen mention Tom's name a few times before, and always with the utmost respect. And, so I knew him obviously to be an extremely intelligent man, but his presentation was completely enthralling to me. And quite honestly, it was after his presentation and it was like 2 a.m. and I was like, oh, I could watch more. I should look up his name and watch more. And then oh no, I should really go to bed. But I was thoroughly hooked, and it truly was. I listened to a couple of episodes of the podcast that Stephen had done, and I had visited the website for John Shahan's program. The Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, and I had signed it at that point, but I think it really was that YouTube video of Tom at the Gable stage which really clinched it for me to say, yeah, I really am finally interested in this subject beyond just the questions that I've engaged with in talking to my husband. And it was that clicked it for me. And I think it was because I could see in Tom a true zest and vigor for the question, and he gave a very vibrant but also very palatable presentation. It didn't throw me, as someone who was very new to the subject, it didn't throw me into this whirlwind of questions and mind numbness where it's like, I don't understand what he's talking about. It was completely engaging and completely understandable for someone like me who is very new to the subject.
I think that was one of the best parts about Tom's presentations at every conference and every presentation. He was also a performer, and he understood the value of his presentation being somewhat entertaining as well as informative. And I think that he had a great blend of those two, which is one of the things that made his presentations some of the ones that we all look forward to every year at each conference. Not to criticize some of our other presenters, but we have some presenters who are very scholarly and can get very deep into the deep research and names and dates and things that you have to sort of have developed a palate for. And Tom had this ability to make his presentations valuable to everyone at every level of this study. Whether you were a newcomer to it or you'd been studying it for decades at a time, his presentations were so charismatic. I think there wasn't a single one that didn't make me laugh a few times throughout the presentation, and he knew how to inject humor into them. And I think that was crucially important.
Absolutely. And I would say his humor was definitely the thing that kept me going and engrossed in it. But also I remember he would periodically do these little trivia questions in the middle of that presentation. And I just remember at some point, me being, I know, like, when I'm watching a YouTube video and I'm like, I want the free book you're going to give away for the person who knows the answer to this trivia question. And it was, me sitting by myself, but truly wishing that I was there and present in there. And, there was a question and answer session afterwards too, and I remember thinking, I have so many questions that I wish I could just ask him right now. And I think that's one of the sad things for me too, is when Stephen told me about Tom's death, I teared up because I had never met the man. I had an image of him in my mind because of that compelling presentation that he gave, but had I ever had the blessing and the chance to meet the man, there were questions that I still wanted to ask him based on that presentation.
Well, I have to tell you, Annie, you aren't alone in having really been influenced by that Gable Stage presentation that Tom gave. I will tell you that back in 2016, during the Oregon Shakespeare Festival summer season, they would send out weekly emails with stories about what were going on with their productions and their production teams and related events. And they would always include some links to other Shakespeare-related subjects on that email, which went out to 10,000 patrons of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And over the course of 1 month, Tom made the cut for the Gable Stage talk on the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And I wrote to him and I said, "You are a made man, Tom."
Incredible.
3,000 people just got your link, and I think you have gone viral. And so fantastic. And you're absolutely right about the way he used his acting skill as a presenter. I mean, we didn't know this. I didn't know this until reading his obituary, truly, that his original plan was to be an actor, and he moved to New York after graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Trinity College in Hartford. He moved to New York and eventually was in a Shakespeare theater group in New Jersey. And then, remarkably, at the age of 50, He went to law school. He graduated from law school in 2003, the same year that I retired from my career in emergency medicine.
Stephen, it's not too late for you to become a lawyer.
So he believed in that golden thread that goes through your life that never, never gives up. So we were part of the weaving of that in the last decades of Tom's life, because he was prodigious in all the work that he did for us. He really was remarkable, and it brought him great joy, and I think great a sense of purpose in spreading the word. His theater company group and the Shakespeare troupe in southern Florida had so many kind things to say in a recent Zoom conference that we shared with us. And Peter, the artistic director, Peter Gallman, the artistic director, said that Tom always came in his boots, i.e., he was prepared. No matter what the circumstances, he could play many roles. He played Oberon. He played Titania. He would have played any role you gave him. He was larger than life in some regards to these people. And yet he'd only been acting in their small company for a couple of years, and yet he touched those people's hearts deeply with simply his acting skills. And of course, he was influencing them profoundly in terms of their concepts of who might have written these works during the same time. So he had ulterior motives doing that. But his presentation in 2015, Law of Evidence and the Shakespeare Authorship Question, has had more hits than any other of the conference videos. So I would encourage you all, listeners, all you Quillers, to go to the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship conference videos site and check out Tom's 2015 talk on the Law of Evidence and the Shakespeare Authorship Question. He really gives you a very clear picture of how important the circumstantial evidence is that supports the Oxfordian claim. And in his last slide on that presentation, he says simply, demand evidence, think critically. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, in 2017, his talk on the 60th anniversary of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship was an outstanding rehashing of the history and the evolution of the Oxfordian movement in North America. And he did great honor to the people who came before us, and especially at the very end of the talk, he memorialized the people who had come and contributed so much and were no longer with us. So he was a consummate person that could deliver the goods in that regard. And of course, at our 2019 conference, he was called upon to memorialize John Paul Stevens, whom he had met in chambers in 2009 when Stevens was elected Oxfordian of the Year. So that was quite an upwardly mobile career for a man. Graduated from law school in 2003 and 2009. He's in the chambers of the Supreme Court.
I was trying to convince Tom to rework that history presentation and make that presentation again this coming year. And we had some exchange back and forth about that idea. And now it appears that it's going to fall to somebody else to do that and now include Tom as a part of that. Because, I said it at the top of the program, 4 straight years as the president during a very particularly momentous time for the organization, for the movement. I credit Tom with my extreme involvement in the organization. When I first joined the organization, he reached out to me, and he and I had very early exchanges, and I've had a chance to go back and look at some of those early emails that we shared when he was basically recruiting me to be a part of the Speakers Bureau because he knew that I had a theatrical background, encouraging me to be more outspoken, more vocal about my Oxfordianism as an artistic director of a theater company. And he believed that I could make a difference in that capacity, and he supported that strongly. I remember when I thought to make a proposal to the conference committee about being a presenter at the Oakland conference. You'll remember, Annie, I was very nervous about it. And I wrote to Tom first before I wrote to the conference committee and pitched my pitch by him first and said, what do you think of this? Do you think this is even valid? Do you think this would work? Do you think the conference committee would be even willing to consider it? And he was so encouraging and so supportive. And he sent me back multiple emails. He reviewed my proposal for me. He encouraged me, gave me some pointers on how to change it before submitting it to the conference committee, and then explained to me what he felt was the best way I should go about approaching the presentation. And, Earl, of course, knows that that's the presentation that here in Southern Oregon has probably made me a marked man, because if you remember, I pretty much tore apart the Oregon Shakespeare Festival's Play On program of wanting to modernize the language of the plays. And I remember after giving the presentation in Oakland, Tom specifically coming to me and congratulating me on the presentation and how well it had gone. And in a sense, feeling a sort of a sense of pride in that he knew that he had helped encourage me to do it and to bring it forward. And so, yeah, I credit Tom very much with my involvement in the organization. I believe that presentation helped lead to others in the organization who then approached me about being the host of this podcast series, and others who approached me about becoming the director of public relations and marketing for the organization. And so all of that is a credit to Tom, and would not have happened had Tom not encouraged me to be more involved in this organization right from day one.
I have to give you a little feedback on your Play On critique, Stephen. Among my fellow instructors at the Lifelong Learning Program at the Southern Oregon University, who are all Shakespeare aficionados and love the traditional representation, you were a real hero. Okay, so while you may consider yourself a marked man in certain circles, there are some diehard dinosaurs that just worship the word that you gave in your critique of Play On, which I think deserved some attention and was well received. It is no longer part of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival program. It's spun off as its own independent nonprofit now, and it continues to have some viability. But the text of those plays hopefully will not be presented on the Oregon Shakespeare Festival stage themselves. So.
We can only hope.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, Stephen, you're right. You're not a man who gets nervous. You have no reason to. You've been in the theater for most of your life, and you have no shred of stage fright in you whatsoever. And I think probably the most nervous I have ever seen you in any questioning anything was that first presentation you gave in Oakland. And you were very nervous. And I could tell it was one of the reasons, because you had so much respect for so many of the people that are in this organization. And I know you kept thinking, they know so much. They all know so much. And I'm still learning. And I think that was one of the most beautiful things that I think Tom would have propagated in you and encouraged in you, was that that's okay, Stephen, because you are still asking questions and you are still learning the same ways we all are. And yes, you might still be relatively new in comparison to many of the scholars that are in this program, but your zest, your zeal, it was something that he saw, obviously, and that he encouraged. And, it's been a trickle-down effect that our family has benefited from. And, so I can only say a humble thank you to Tom in his memory for giving you that courage to move forward.
That is one of my sadnesses about this is, when I came back from Oakland and it had gone so well and I had so much to report to Annie, and then of course the presentation did get posted on YouTube, and as she said, which led to us watching it, which the very next one that YouTube suggested was Tom's, and that's how that happened, right? So his presentation was what their algorithm said, well, if you liked this one, you'll probably like this one. And that's what prompted you to then watch it. But then I remember going to Hartford, and I remember preparing my presentation for Hartford, which hasn't posted to the YouTube yet. But I remember coming back from Hartford and telling you about that whole interaction and some of my conversations with Tom at that time, and how I had said to him, have you listened to the podcast with my wife yet, where she talks about your Gable stage presentation and credits you with becoming an Oxfordian? And I told him how much you look forward to meeting him. And I was so looking forward to seeing the two of you face to face in the same room together at the Ashland conference this fall. And I have a deep sadness that that's not going to happen now. But I know that wherever Tom's spirit is, right now, and it's in this room with the three of us as we pay tribute to the great contributions that he made to this organization and to Oxfordianism as a whole.
He was very involved with the theater community in South Florida. Gave a Thurgood Marshall talk, inaugural talk to the Miami Legal Society and Bar Association. And so he was the inaugural speaker speaking on Hamlet and the law of homicide. So he had huge respect within his legal community. His theatrical community really loved him as well. But I think we knew him as well as any of those other communities because we combined those parts of his love, because we could have a discourse of reason within our community. And his writing, whether it was in response to some criticism of John Paul Stevens by James Shapiro that appeared in the New Yorker, or his review of the book Shakespeare Beyond Doubt, edited by Edmondson and Wells, or his own law articles that are available. He always wrote with great intelligence and skill. He was a copyright, kind of person. I mean, copy reader. He could spot grammatical errors and spelling errors like nobody else. He actually was, proofreading almost every Oxfordian publication. He made us much more professional all the way around. He made all of us up our game because of the way he was. So more than his own achievement, he inspired others like you, Stephen. I certainly was influenced by his great good works and felt I had a true partner, a true collaborator in every regard, could always rely on that. He always had my back and I could have his when it was needed. And it's such a tragic loss. It seems to me that a man of his qualities and his achievement and where he was in his life and the communities that he supported more robustly than almost anyone else, his age, my age, any age. And I just am very glad to have an opportunity to share a few of these words with our listeners. I know there are other Oxfordians who have similar experiences with Tom and like we have, and will want to share their feelings. There is a obituary that was posted this week on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website memorializing Tom, and I think your readers would very much benefit from reading. His Gable stage presentation is available on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. So those of you who are curious about Annie's obsession with this and her conversion through this, I would recommend you go take a look. In the news items, it's on page 14, just to give you a slight guidance.
His most recent presentation, the one that he made in Hartford, is one that I have to turn on for you, Annie, for you to watch, because I know you'll enjoy it. And I think everybody listening, all our listeners will enjoy it. It's very humorous. It's one of his most humorous of all of his presentations, I think. And because it's Kill All the Lawyers. And he explains what the author meant by that, which character says that line in the play, why that the character says that line, the sarcasm behind it and what it means. And then he gives this great historical perspective to the events and incidences that are being depicted in the play. And being a lawyer, of course, he was very able to self-deprecate there and to joke and laugh at himself as a lawyer. Every lawyer has heard all the lawyer jokes, including that one. And so it was a really fun presentation, as I recall, in Hartford. And again, it's one of those, when you're at a SOF conference, it can be, it's multiple days, it's long days. It begins bright and early in the morning and doesn't finish until late in the afternoon. You can go through as many as, what do you say, Earl, about 8 to 10 presentations a day. Yeah. Right? What we have. And so sometimes you kind of choose as you're looking through the program for the weekend, you choose which ones you really want to see and which ones maybe you can miss or skip or take a rest or a break or even a nap sometimes. And hope that the presenter isn't going to take it personal that you weren't in the room. But I can tell you, every conference that I've been at, Tom's presentations, the room was always full. Nobody wanted to miss a presentation from Tom because they knew it was going to not only open their eyes to some new area of research or information, but also make you laugh and keep you entertained. And that will certainly be missed at our next conference.
Well, Tom had game. And in 2017, when he had agreed to take on the mantle of the unprecedented 4th year as president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, it was my privilege, actually, to give him a gift, and that was a costume, a gown for Richard II that was made for an actor at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which I had in my possession because it was gifted to me by one of my students at the Lifelong Learning Program. And with that and a small crown with a bobblehead Shakespeare on top, this was presented to Tom at the 2017 conference, and he was absolutely delighted. There's images of that costume and crown on our website, so you can appreciate that. But he was so game. And at the end of that conference, he gave the speech of Launce departing with Proteus on his way to Milan from Verona, and with his little dog. And Tom was hysterically funny. He was running around up there in the front, acting such a great fool. And finally, the last words of the speeches are, I go. And he ran off the stage, and it was the end of the conference. He had such a sense of dramatic humor that, we loved it. And you're right, absolutely. His presentations were full of wit and interesting questions that he would point to the audience and make sure that you were paying attention. He obviously was a natural born teacher. And I know that he taught at the Miami Law School. He taught Shakespeare and the law there. He taught at the Thurgood Marshall School in Chicago when he was in residence there as a clerk for one of the federal judges. His career as an attorney was amazing. I mean, he went to Columbia Law to get his master's degree when he was in his mid-50s and graduated summa cum laude. So we had a man of the highest qualities of the and most sincere determination as our advocate. He was truly a man for all seasons, and we will miss him terribly. And this whole past week since his passing has been a real excursion. And I just would recommend, as we all have, is to go and look at his videos and experience what he has to share with us and keep his spirit alive by engaging him in the way that he loved to share.
I definitely plan on going down the rabbit hole a little bit more on all of his YouTube videos. There are more out there that I still have yet to see that I'm excited to see. I know for me, this is the first year that, the conference is hopefully going to be in Ashland again this year. This is my plan to come. And it will be my first time attending a Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship conference. And I know I was looking forward to looking at the schedule and picking out the days that I would attend and specifically going, yes, I have to go that day because Tom's presenting that day. So I will personally miss going to see his presentation in person. But I still look forward to attending the conference and seeing what comes in a tribute to him in person.
Well, and you don't want to miss any of Earl's presentations either, by the way, because he's no slouch when it comes to his presentations. So when you go in there and you start rabbit holing Tom, you can also rabbit hole Dr. Showerman over here as well. And you get your dose of Shakespeare in the law and Shakespeare in medicine. Shakespeare in the law, Shakespeare in medicine, OPS and some Greeks. Throw some Greeks in there.
Well, this lawyer doctor thing goes way back, Stephen. George Greenwood? No, it was Lord Campbell, excuse me, in the late 19th century published a book on Shakespeare's legal acquirement, and the following year John Charles Bucknell dedicated his work Shakespeare's medical knowledge to Lord Campbell. You see? So these lawyers and doctors have been going back and forth on this for a long time.
Who gets to claim him, right? Wait, was he a lawyer? Was he a doctor? Was he a lawyer? Was he a doctor?
He was a performer. He was a practitioner. You practice the law. You brought this up in a previous podcast in our discussion. And physicians are practitioners, and so are theater arts professionals. They're practitioners. And it's this art that we all share. I mean, it makes sense that the Inns of Court were the place where the theater was born in Renaissance England, that it was the first performances were at Gray's Inn, where the Earl of Oxford was attending. So those law courts were places where they had dramatic presentations. So there's a long history of the connection between the law, theater, and medicine.
Well, the best lawyers, I'm sure, would tell you. I don't know. Tom was an appellate attorney, and so he dealt with a lot of appeals cases. He won many cases in many various high courts. And so it's not the same as, giving closing arguments before a jury. But I can only imagine how he would have been, with his flair and his charisma and his ability to present. It'd be difficult for a jury to not be won over by him, and I think that a lot of lawyers would agree that there's a performance requirement to giving a good, solid closing argument and winning over that audience for your client, and so definitely those things sort of connect. My mother always tried to convince me to go become a lawyer rather than an actor. And, so now I have Tom as a inspiration. As Annie said, it's not too late. I could still go to law school. I'll be 49 this year, so I'm still behind the curve as far as Tom's concerned. So one of the things that we definitely wanted to do today on this program is not only the three of us have an opportunity to pay tribute to Tom in our various different ways, from Earl, who has known and worked with Tom for more than 15 years now, and my multiple years experience with him, and crediting him to my full involvement in the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship in so many ways. And then Annie being more of a newcomer to Oxfordianism, but also having that same thread that connects us all is Tom. And I know that there are so many other Oxfordians out there who have that same thread of connection to the organization and to the three of us, thanks to him. And one of the things that we're going to do in this episode that we want our listeners to be able to listen to and enjoy is several tributes that we have from several other Oxfordians, prominent Oxfordians, those who knew Tom very well and worked with him closely in this movement and in other ways as well, have had an opportunity to share some of their stories about Tom and what is their favorite aspect of him and their time with him. Before we get to that, Earl, can you tell us one more really good Tom story?
Oh gosh,
there has to be something that can be a little more lighthearted as we say goodbye to this wonderful mind and incredible soul. There has to be something else that can make us laugh a little bit that he did, or that you two shared, or you mentioned that he saved you a few times.
He did. I was in despair that we could reach some language that would satisfy the various representations of different thinking on the Shakespeare Fellowship Board when he came up with that description in response to Emmerich's film that we recited part of here today. So to me, that was it. I mean, from then on, I could always rely on Tom. And I think rather than something funny, something more serious is in my heart right now, because it is a hard thing as a physician to deal with people who die before you, and strangers who come, in my experience, through the emergency room where I worked for 30 years. Many passed on, a handful were resuscitated successfully. But the knowledge of Tom's passing and the suddenness of it and the tragical qualities of it touched me as deeply as any loss in my life, truly, because of the qualities of the man and the sense of collegiality that we shared. So I would end this on a more sober note, saying that I dearly, dearly miss the man and will always think of him in terms of what else could I do to help the movement that he believed in so seriously and so dedicatedly. And that's how I would summarize my feelings about Tom.
That I think that's very moving and very touching. You know, I think for me, it's almost in a place where it's still surreal, in that I don't know that my heart has acknowledged the loss, right? My mind knows what has happened, but because I didn't see him regularly or interact with him regularly, I don't know that it will really sink in for me until we are all gathered together again and his absence will be so noted. Especially, I know, and I'm certain that there will be members of the organization who will pick up this mantle, but I know that we will all miss those moments that always came at the end of the conference, at the end of the banquet, at the end of the awards. We knew we could always count on Tom to get up and perform a piece from the canon for us. And it was always different every year. And he always was working secretly on whatever it was that he was preparing for that year's conference. And he would get up there with such a plume, and really his passion for the text came through in ways that I've seen not prevalent in Shakespearean actors who I've known who have been Shakespearean actors in their lives, not lawyers who love Shakespeare. And so I know that that's something that I'm definitely going to miss, that many of us are going to miss, but I'm certain we can count on a few Oxfordians to pick up where Tom left off and give us a fitting tribute. In fact, I know one of the things that Tom always said, particularly in Hartford, we talked about A Midsummer Night's Dream. It was one of his favorites. And he talked about having performed it for students at schools in Florida as part of the Shakespeare group that he was a part of. And he would light up, he lit up for me as he started reciting some of Titania's monologue, because he just loved the fact that he had had the opportunity to play Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And, you know, there aren't a lot of men who can claim that. And, but yeah, and that will be forever my fondest memory of Tom, is him reciting the lines of Titania. With such flair.
Yeah.
So we'll miss you, Tom.
We'll miss you.
We'd like you to stay tuned now as we hear some parting thoughts from some other fellow Oxfordians who want to say their own tribute in their own words.
Hi, I'm Julie Sandys Bianchi. I've known Tom primarily as a colleague since I became a member of the SOF board about 3 years ago, and he was serving as board president. As a retired stage manager, I thoroughly appreciated his systematic, highly structured approach to the board's business. And if I were to imagine him being cast for a part in a play, I would have pegged him at first for one of the more sober, serious-minded roles that drive the exposition, but not the drama. And then I saw him wearing an over-the-top costume and performing a comic scene from Two Gentlemen of Verona one evening at the SOF conference in Chicago. Well, it's safe to say that I never could look at him through the same eyes again.
Hello, I'm Keir Cutler. My wife Evelyn and I were horribly saddened to hear of Tom's passing. He was a wonderful man, always friendly, always generous with his time, and so knowledgeable. He was a very valuable resource person for me. But since his death, I've gone through my many emails with him over the years, and I realized they were all me asking for advice or information, and Tom kindly replying with his great expertise. Let me give you just one example. In 2016, I posted an event on Facebook I was doing in Toronto with Diana Price. A leading reviewer of a major Canadian newspaper The viewer's name, Kelly Nestruck, saw the announcement and took to Facebook to condemn the event and chastise anyone who would even consider attending. Well, this for me was totally unacceptable. I mean, after all, he can write for his newspaper. He doesn't need to go on Facebook and condemn events. I was outraged. So I wrote to Tom for advice on how to handle this tricky situation. He immediately replied with his typical wisdom. Tom wrote, "Keir, I would definitely write to this newspaper, calmly, rationally pointing out the errors in Kelly's reasoning," and I use that term loosely, "as I know you can do very well. The calmer you remain, the more frantic he will probably get." Well, I took his advice and wrote the newspaper, and sure enough, the reporter was eventually reprimanded. As well he should have been. That was Tom's advice. He was always calm and considered and valuable. Just last week, I posted Tom's latest video from Hartford on Kill All the Lawyers on the Shakespeare Forum. I was so pleased by the reaction. Many people were impressed. So Tom's videos live on. And they are so well done and so informative, I have no doubt they'll be seen for years, if not decades in the future. He had such a gift for matching his speech with his visuals. And as a person, he shall be greatly, greatly missed. He was a man, take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. Thank you.
This is Cheryl Egan Donovan in Boston, Massachusetts. I met Tom 15 years ago in Ashland, Oregon, when I attended my first Shakespeare Authorship Conference. I had the great pleasure of working with Tom as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship when he was president and I was Finance Committee chair. Tom was a brilliant scholar, an excellent mentor, and a truly extraordinary individual. During my tenure on the board, I worked with Tom to launch the Who Wrote Shakespeare online video contest. One of Tom's many legacies, it is truly inclusive and international. He was passionate about this initiative and worked tirelessly to expand its reach. He was very proud of the extent to which these creative short films connected viewers with the SOF and its mission. Through this contest, the SOF reached thousands of Shakespeare enthusiasts around the world. Expertly designed and managed by Jennifer Newton, the contest will continue to bring Shakespeare's story to new audiences. Tom very generously supported my documentary film about Edward de Vere as Shakespeare, both personally and as president of the SOF. In 2016, he spoke as a panelist at the screening of my film at the Boston Public Library's All the City's a Stage, a season of Shakespeare celebration. At a critical moment, he graciously agreed to allow me to end my term as a board member early in order to finish the film and receive financial support from the SOF. His generosity led directly to the release of the film in the US and Canada last year. This summer, Nothing is Truer Than Truth will be released in the UK for broadcast and then in the rest of the world. Most recently, I had the honor of sharing the stage with Tom at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., at the Shakespeare Identified Centennial Symposium, where he argued beautifully and very persuasively for the power of circumstantial evidence. After dinner, we shared an Uber to the airport. He talked about how happy he was in his personal and professional life, having met someone he loved very much, and having cut back on his caseload so that he had more time to perform works from the canon as a member of the Shakespeare Troupe of South Florida. He said that one of the greatest joys of acting in the company was when they performed at shelters for the homeless, where the audience members would often recite the words of the plays along with the actors, bringing a few moments of joy to those in need. This, too, is Tom's legacy. We are indebted to Tom for his dedication to inclusivity, his generosity of spirit, and his joie de vivre. He was and continues to be an inspiration for all of us.
Hello, I am John Hamill, President of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Thank you for joining us today to talk about Tom Regnier. Given the circumstances, I hope you're all safe and keep that way. Tom Regnier was a former president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and was Oxfordian of the Year in 2016, and he was our dear friend and colleague. He passed away Tuesday, April 14th from complications of coronavirus. His family informed us that Tom was hospitalized with coronavirus symptoms on Thursday, April 2nd, and went on ventilator support several days later. His condition was stabilized, and we held hope he would recover. But as days went by, his status worsened again. We are devastated by this loss. We in the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship are privileged to be, in a sense, Tom's extended family, united by our common love for the author Shakespeare and our fascination with that author's real identity, Oxford. We all know Tom was an exceptional man. He made everyone feel welcome and that their contribution and ideas were valuable. He was also a very hard worker. He managed many functions for the SOF. As chair of the Communications Committee, a role he also led as president, he set up and maintained, with the help of others, our website. In effect, to the public, he was the face of the SOF. Many of you have seen Tom speak in one of his wonderful authorship lectures, either in person or on YouTube channel. I invite you to look up his presentations on the YouTube channel. They are excellent. I, like many of you, became his good friend, and we helped each other out over his last years. As you know, he was our president for 4 years. I will only add briefly here what you already know. Tom was an outstanding human being. He was a powerful guiding force for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and for the Oxfordian movement worldwide. We're very, very lucky to have him with us and work for us. Tom had many talents. He was truly a Renaissance man. He was a successful lawyer in Florida, an actor, writer, researcher, presenter, Shakespeare lover, and so much more. There is so much more we will say and do to honor and mourn our friend, and in due time celebrate his life and work. Following now is a little sonnet in his memory. The call from Florida brought us sad news, a bright light, a friend no longer about. A teacher, attorney, scholarly muse, an expert in Shakespeare that's beyond doubt. The research he established, mostly by grants, Stratfordians examined, much shaken by fear. It proved one more time the bar had no pants and would have made proud of our Edward de Vere. The web he managed sits forlorn and tangled. Is there some hope, perchance, tomorrow? This mortal coil in your name will wrangle. Parting at times is not such sweet sorrow. Oxford now greets him along with Shakespeare, as would be the due to Thomas Regnier. Tom, we'll miss you.
This is Teresa Lauricella. Tom was the first to welcome me to SOF. In fact, he was the first really to get me involved more actively in the fellowship when I joined the communication committee. I can remember when he called the first time to walk me through the steps of the website, and it was such an honor to get the chance to talk to him one-on-one, because it was really his research that I had been following for so long. His brilliant research on Hamlet and the law. It had been my go-to for quite some time, and he's so humble. So humble. I also was fortunate to get the chance to be in Lynn Kozitsky's A Question of Will in Boston with Tom. He played De Vere, and I played Bridget. Afterwards, he'd salute me as his good daughter Bridget when emailing about the website, and sometimes I would turn it back on him and greet him as my most noble and honorable father. Tom is such an inspiration. In an article Tom wrote for the SOF newsletter, he stated, We just need more of us to get out there and spread the word. Every Oxfordian is a lighted candle in a Stratfordian darkness. Your lighted candle, Tom, still shines bright. And it always will.
Tom Regnier was the godfather of the popular column called How I Became an Oxfordian, which runs on the SOF website. He was also indirectly the inspiration for a monthly meeting in Washington of people who believe that Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, wrote the works attributed to somebody called Shakespeare. Over the years, I had grown tired and angry when people told me that if you didn't believe Shakespeare wrote everything, you were probably a flat earther. That was definitely not my experience, and I wanted to do something about it. My idea was that Oxfordians would write brief profiles of themselves that would go on the website. 500 words, tops. I would edit. Tom, then the president of SOF, liked the idea immediately, and he made arrangements for the pieces to have a permanent home on the SOF website. He supported the idea wholeheartedly. Whenever a new piece was submitted, he took great pride in declaring, "Another customer." To date, there have been more than 80 profiles printed. One of Tom's friends was the late Gareth Howell, an international business attorney. Gareth was a member of the Cosmos Club in Washington and often attended meetings of its traditional William wrote them all, damn it, Shakespeare group. Sometime in 2014, he invited Tom to speak about Hamlet and Hamlet's knowledge of the law. Tom loved the way the knowledge of English law was woven throughout Hamlet. It revealed authorship. How would an uneducated lad from Stratford have known these things? Tom made his presentation with PowerPoints, never having touched on authorship. After the talk at the Cosmos Club, as Gareth recounted in his own How I Became piece, I asked Tom whether it was not obvious that a 16th century provincial grain dealer and sometime jobbing actor impresario would be unlikely to have sophisticated legal knowledge of this kind. The room froze in various degrees. The moderator responded magisterially, "We do not discuss biography here." Not exactly. The power of Tom's presentation had kindled a spark that Rick Wagaman and others fanned. A new group was started at the club, the Shakespeare Authorship Inquiries Group, and today that group heads into its 5th consecutive year of monthly meetings. Sadly, our kind and gentle friend, Tom Regnier, never wrote his own story of how he became an Oxfordian.
This is Rick Wagaman speaking. I've known Tom for about 6 years. My recollection is that when I was the co-chair of a monthly Shakespeare discussion group at my club, which I think I'm not supposed to name, I invited Tom to come speak to us about Shakespeare and the law, since I knew that was one of Tom's many areas of expertise. So Tom was happy to come speak with us, coming to Washington, D.C. from his home in Florida at his own expense. And he accepted our invitation to stay at our house for 3 nights while he was here. So I got to know him well. He's an utterly delightful person, as all of you know. So I got to know him both as a person and as a very, very dedicated Oxfordian. He did speak to us on Shakespeare and the Law, gave a superb talk. But because the authorship issue was taboo in that club, don't ask me why, Tom respected my request not to bring it up in his talk. He did not. Of course, I learned that some of the people there, including one very prominent Stratfordian Shakespeare scholar, had looked him up and knew who he was. But one of the more interesting things happened after Tom's talk was over in the question and answer period. I believe it was the second question was posed by a new club member I'd never met. But when I tell you what his question was, you will understand how utterly thrilled I was. The question was, Mr. Regnier, given Shakespeare's astonishing familiarity with the law, would you not agree that it's more likely that Hamlet and all the other plays of Shakespeare were written by someone with legal training, such as Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford? Well, Tom was momentarily at a loss because this brought up the very topic I had asked him not to talk about. I later learned that the intrepid questioner was none other than another attorney, Gareth Howell, who then did all of the arduous work necessary to form a new monthly group at our club, now led by Bob Myers, the Shakespeare Authorship Inquiries Club. So all that happened thanks to Tom. I've gotten to know Tom well in the years since then. He has always been utterly amazing. I valued his advice, including when I thought we should bring a lawsuit against the Folger Shakespeare Library for breach of faith, since their founder, Mr. Folger, was open-minded enough about the authorship question to purchase the Geneva Bible, owned previously by the Earl of Oxford, but Tom said no, it would not be a good lawsuit. So I imagine his heart was with me, but his legal mind knew that that would be a bad idea. We will always miss Tom terribly, and we will do everything we can to honor his memory.
This is Brian Wildenthal, first vice president of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. Tom Regnier, where to begin? I think Tom and I always loved talking about law and Shakespeare. We had the lawyer thing in common, and he loved teaching law too. He loved so much being an adjunct professor of law, teaching about Shakespeare and the law, which I obviously related to as a law professor. But what I remember and I really want to emphasize about Tom is how he loved sharing his knowledge and his enthusiasm in such a generous and humble way. Someone commented that he was always the smartest guy in the room, but he would never let you know it. And I remember when after he died, I mentioned it to my mother-in-law. She was very saddened. I knew she had seen him speak about Shakespeare. I didn't know whether she had ever really talked with him personally, but she said, yeah, she said at a conference last year, he took her aside, struck up a conversation with her, and just wanted to talk to her and hear from her about why she was interested in Shakespeare. She's from India. She grew up in India and fell in love with Shakespeare in the 1960s, and he wanted to know all about that. And that's what makes a great teacher, is someone who just has just an eager and such an approachable way of communicating with people, and someone who wants to learn from others and from his students. Tom was always about other people. He was very focused on other people and never sought attention for himself. And he had tremendous knowledge, but he shared it in a way that is just the way the best teachers do, is not to be kind of lecturing from on high, but just to share the wonder of their own discovery and their own knowledge. So many things I wish I could talk about him with now. So let's try to remember Tom and cherish the unique person he really was.
Thank you, Quillers, for joining us again for another episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. I know it was a somber episode, but a fitting episode and a tribute to our friend Tom Regnier. If you haven't already listened to the podcast episode where Tom is featured on Shakespeare and the Law, you can find and stream that episode as well. We hope you will go to the YouTube channel and find some of his compelling videos and watch some of the wonderful presentations that he has there, as well as some of the other great presentations from our other presenters. Don't forget that Don't Quill the Messenger is brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, your source for everything Shakespeare authorship question related. And you can find a plethora of materials there to help you continue your inquiry in the spirit of Tom's own words, when he said, demand evidence and think critically. We'd also like to remind you, keep asking questions.
It's Dragon Wagon.